Ravikant, he's like a Twitter personality, or he's kind of become like a digital guru. But something that I've been watching some of his videos, and I just like his really conversation about leverage. So he essentially says there's 4 types of leverage. The first 2 we're kind of all familiar with which are capital and labor. So I mean, obviously, what was it? The communist that was, it's capital versus labor. And I think that's kind of, I guess those are the traditional forms of leverage. And then Naval, he talks about the new forms of leverage, which are code and media. So code is a form of leverage and media is a form of leverage. So those are kind of the 4 broad types of leverage. So the four types of leverage are labor. So the 4 types of leverage are labor, capital, code, and media. In the first 2, so those are kind of the 4 forms of leverage that Naval talks about. In the first 2, labor and capital, those are permission forms of leverage, and then code and media are permissionless. So when we talk about leverage as permission leverage, if I have labor, which is a form of leverage, I guess let me back up to, what is leverage? Why do I care? So Archimedes has a quote, give me a lever long enough and I can move the earth. So I think we're all familiar with the idea of like a teeter-totter, or if you get a really long stick, or even I've done some plumbing, and sometimes if you have a really rusty bolt or a screw, if you have a short little wrench, it's really hard to do, but the longer that wrench gets, the less force you have to put in because of leverage, because you're using kind of a leverage tool. So you can think of leverage as just tools or kind of things that are powerful. So I think, for example, in transportation, this might be an easy example to think of leverage. So if I ask you to walk a mile, we all have a human body. So with no leverage, you could walk a mile. And then a couple other forms. So say you have a bicycle. So the bicycle could be considered a form of transportation leverage, of someone on a bicycle is going to travel that mile much faster than someone by foot, because they have a tool, they have leverage, they have a bicycle. And obviously you can kind of keep extrapolating this out. If you have a car, you can drive a mile much faster than someone on a bike, and definitely much faster than someone walking. A train, an airplane too is a form of leverage. So I just flew back from a recent trip from New York City to Buffalo, and I flew that because I had leveraged in that I had an airplane ticket. So you can think of leverage of things that increase your powerfulness or your effectiveness. So essentially just kind of tools. So labor and money are kind of the 2 older ones. So obviously the reason these are permissioned forms of leverage is that ultimately you need someone to give you permission to use them. So for labor, for example, I'm looking for a job right now. I have labor, so I have a stack of skills, experiences that I have. So I have my labor. I just got done helping my friend build a pergola, and so I used my labor, and essentially someone hired me for me to provide my labor. So another form of labor is if you're in management. So one person is hard to do a lot by yourself, but if you're a manager at a company, you might have 2 to 3 or 8 people directly beneath you. So managing people is a form of leverage. So, for example, if you have a team of people that report directly to you, you supervise them and you manage their work, and you can kind of think of your directions and your management as a way to increase your efficiency of your labor. So that's why so yeah. And then capital, he talks about capital as a form of leverage. So obviously we kind of all understand money is essentially a tool. So taking it back to my airplane analogy, I didn't build the airplane. I didn't fly the airplane. Literally all I had capital. I had money that I used to buy an airplane ticket, and then someone sold me an airplane ticket for money. All I had to do was give them money. I didn't have to be responsible for flying the plane, for planning the route, for stocking the pantry with food for the guests or anything. All I did was pay money, used capital, and was able to acquire access to a plane ticket to travel much further. So these are kind of the 2 permissioned forms of leverage, because obviously if I have money, someone has to agree to take my money in exchange for that to be a useful resource. And the two newer forms of leverage that Naval talks about are media and code. So these are powerful because they're permissionless. So if let's start with media. So for example, this is the reason that I've kept doing the show and want to keep doing the show is that media is a form of leverage. So it's permissionless form. So no one asked me to, do this form. And obviously I'm very thankful for Think Twice. They've given me permission to use their studio, but I hypothetically could just be at my house with a webcam recording myself and publishing it and not having to ask anyone, hey, is it okay if I publish my video or publish my podcast? So media is kind of and obviously there's different types of media so for example, like an NBC broadcaster probably it's a form of media, but they have to ask their producers what they can show. But media is one form of leverage. So you can think of like writing books, writing blogs, tweeting, recording podcasts. They're all forms of media that no one asks. You don't have to give permission to produce media at this point. Podcasts are a good example of anyone with a microphone and a camera can record themselves and publish it on the internet without having to ask anyone for permission. Code also is a permissionless form of leverage. So code is something you can just write. As long as you have computers, you can write code, put it on a server, and then that code, you can publish it without anyone needing permission from anyone. So that's kind of, if you think of the four types of leverage, which are labor, capital, code, and media, labor and capital are permission because someone needs to hire you for your labor. Someone needs to, submit to your authority if you're managing them. And then capital, someone ultimately needs to, if you exchange capital for some sort of form of leverage, someone needs to ultimately accept that. So yeah, those are permission, and then permissionless leverage, which is media or code, are kind of the newer forms of leverage that Naval talks about for building wealth, is because they're permissionless. Anyone can produce a podcast, or anyone can write code, and they don't need anyone's permission to it. So they're kind of newer forms of leverage. So I kind of wanted to, start the show with that segment because it's kind of going to lead me into a little bit, I think, about the economy. I think being aware of these kind of, you can think of them as levers. We all have 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And Noel talks about in some of his speech is like, when you think of Elon Musk, someone like Elon Musk or Bezos, Jeff Bezos, and compare them to, I don't know, a deli shop owner in New York City that, is open 24 hours. They both are working hard, right? They're putting in hours, they are working hard, but the outputs or the wealth they're able to generate is completely different. And this is because the deli store owner and someone like an Elon Musk or Bezos are using different forms of leverage. So again, take it back to kind of the wrench analogy. If you have two people on, the same bolt pulling equally as hard, if the plumber with a longer wrench is going to have more leverage than someone with a smaller wrench, they could be pulling the same with the same force, but because the plumber with the longer they have more leverage, they're going to be able to crank that bolt longer. And it's the same thing with leverage. So it's I think kind of in the economy, we've always thought of like, if you work hard, you get rewarded. And that is true, but you could work the same hardness, or you can work the same amount. And if you're using forms of leverage more effectively than someone else, you're going to have bigger outputs. So just an example, not that the deli owner doesn't have leverage, right? They might have a property, they might have money that they invested in their business. They might be managing a staff. But it's a different type of leverage to say someone like Oprah, I think is a perfect example. If she's leveraged media, not to say she doesn't work hard, but she's created a brand for herself, and that brand has rewarded her and ultimately been a form of leverage. So I want to start the show just because my experience, I've been looking for a job lately, and I think there's many things with it. So one of the things I think our economy is changing. So so our economy used to be, before the invention of the internet, media was even a permission form of leverage. You ultimately need to go to a TV producer or a radio show, and they had to agree to have you on their show. Where now with the internet, it's kind of made it permissionless. So historically, our economy has been, before the internet, was primarily labor and capital. Labor and capital as the forms of leverage. So those were the main forms. And I think with technology, I'm just seeing, even myself, how much our economy is changing. I know, like, for example, I'm using AI to like write cover letters and help me edit my resumes for different jobs. Because as I'm applying for jobs, like I would like to make my resume and my cover letter different to each employer that I'm applying to. So for example, like I'm using AI to write those, and then the more I've learned, just the more I've applied to jobs, like the more I'm realizing that employers are also using AI to, scan my cover letter and resume. So we kind of have an economy of I'm a human being looking to be employed by another human being. And there's this AI or this technology in the middle that really is being put there for many reasons. I'm using AI because it's easier for me to write a cover letter, something that might take me a couple hours to do. I can get a rough draft started with AI. And also an employer that posts a job that might get 300 applications, they can use an AI to easily scan all the resumes and cover letters for keywords. But I think that's just one example of how, and even my new favorite thing is just applying for jobs online and then physically going to the location saying, hi, I'm Matt. I applied for a job online. I'd like to speak with them. And just, the look on people's faces is just like, does not compute. Like, did you apply online? Can you just apply online? And I go, no, I'm here to speak with someone. They go, oh no, like, apply online. So kind of companies are using technology. And even I was in the airport on the way traveling, and we sit down at a bar, and the bar has designed it so that when you sit down, there's a bartender there, you're sitting at the bar, but what you have to do is you have to scan a QR code. So your order goes to the computer comes up in the register, and then they've kind of taken away the human interaction with technology. So I think there's a good quote too, that if you can be trained for a job, eventually your job or your labor is going to be done by a computer. So I think just as I move forward, and I think I'm interested in, I just bought the metachewy.com domain, but I've been thinking about my role, and I'm kind of done with the whole W-2 economy. Like I'm really getting frustrated with, I guess the labor form of my labor is leverage of, like I have labor, I want to bring it to the market, but ultimately I need someone to give me permission to use my labor as a W-2 or as an employee. So I'm really interested in still applying for jobs, but I'm also going to start kind of operating under the MetaChewy brand. So kind of all my handles are MetaChewy, and I'm just interested in kind of pursuing this path of trying to use code and trying to use media. And I've told people what I'm trying to do is use the internet to make money. I want to make money while I sleep. I want to detach my money making from my time, right? Because even as labor, I just helped build like a pergola today, and like it was exhausting, right? And if you kind of, I think our whole economy too is set up for W-2 and employees it directs people towards using labor as their only form of economic leverage. And it's exhausting because if you are a salaried employee and you're based on time, like an hour in, hour out. So you have, in order to get paid, you need to put in an hour. Whereas a great thing that, and even why podcasting is such a great form of leverage is I can spend 1 hour of my time here recording a podcast, publish it on the internet, and then people all over the world or wherever can watch, as much or as little as they want. They could watch it, now as I live stream it. They could watch it when I'm sleeping tonight. They could watch it 6 months from now. So where traditionally, if I was working for an hour, say I was, helping build a shed for an hour, I work for an hour, the shed gets constructed, or as much as I can do an hour, I get an hour for my labor, and then that there's no residual or there's no kind of compounding effect where some of the people I've been following online of creators are, if you can kind of efficiently use these forms of leverage, you can work very little. And so, for example, Dan Coe is another person I've been following because he's kind of in the internet creator space, and all he does is like write a newsletter where he spends like 2 hours a day just writing a newsletter, but puts a lot of labor into that letter. But then just from one newsletter, he records himself reading the newsletter to create a podcast, and he chops up that podcast into short form. So he might only work for an hour reading, but it's just a way to, if you can, the new wealth of the 21st century in the digital is going to come from the new forms of leverage, which are code in media, because we have now this new form of leverage at our fingertips that works while we sleep, is permissionless. And the thing about code is if you put it on a server, the marginal cost of like reproducing that. So if you think of like even Henry Ford and the Model T, you have a blueprint for a Model T, and it takes time to build a Model T, build a Model T, where essentially with code, you kind of just, your code is your blueprint. And then if you write that code once, the cost to reproduce that code twice is zero, right? You've written the code, all the computers access, the server where that code is stored, but you don't need to like reproduce that code a bunch of times. You're literally just making one piece of code that multiple computers can go in. So, even this podcast too, I record it one time, and then many people can tune in many times, just from one kind of production, versus if I was just here, talking to one person without any cameras, that conversation would end. So yeah, I just think that our economy is changing. I think a lot of the, just the old dogmas. I think we're, struggling. I think as humans as we're in a fast changing world, and a lot of the dogmas of, that code or that labor and capital are the forms of leverage. Those are still available at our fingertips, but coded media are newer forms that I think people like myself that are maybe younger or maybe looking to just become more efficient and kind of adapt to this new world are interested in pursuing those routes. Because even management or labor as a form of leverage, it's very messy to, organize human beings, get them to follow you, get them to listen to you, kind of direct all of their work. Versus code, we kind of have unlimited robots. So that's kind of my discussion on leverage. I think just something, and I can share some Naval videos, or we can, but yeah, just search Naval leverage, and I like just listening to him talk about leverage and kind of the new economy, because I think some people get it and some people are still figuring out. But I think the days of working at a company, for 47, 50 years, and then retiring, those days are long gone. And I think if you can find a way to use the new forms of leverage, which are media and code and permissionless, to just increase your impact, that's kind of the future route that I'm interesting to preserve. So drop questions in the comments if you have any comments. But that's kind of just my frame of mind at this point of time of what I'm thinking. So I think part of me trying to want to make like the Meta Chewy brand is just, even if you think of like Naval, Oprah, Trump, they're not really a business. And I've seen some creators say that like human beings don't follow companies. Like you might follow like McDonald's, but you maybe, or that's maybe not a good example, but yeah, we're not like, especially a lot of companies like on social media, all they'll do is they'll hire like a really popular influencer and get that influencer to represent their brand, right? Because brands are kind of these large behemoths, but they're not people. Like I think as we move forward in this digital economy, I think one thing that's not going to change, because I know Jeff Bezos likes to talk about like it's easy to, or a lot of people think about what will change in 100 years, but try to think about what won't change. And I think humans will always be wired to want like human interaction. And I just know there's something powerful about like me. I'm a person. I can look in this camera, talking to this camera, and it feels like I'm talking to you, versus like a brand like McDonald's or Geico. Geico can't talk to you in the camera directly, right? They hire that weird mascot lady, and then she represents Geico, but she's literally just a person that they're like a caricature that the brand's trying to go through. So I just think with the internet, there's the individual, it really empowers the individual. And I think just things like one people business, you're going to see people follow people. And I feel like even too are deteriorating like media landscape. So like we used to have channels like channel 1 or channel 2, 4, and 7, right? We had 3 news channels, where now we just have like Joe Rogan or who are some other podcasts. But yeah, people follow like individual creators, individual podcasts. So I think we're kind of seeing this disintegration of the archaic model of like a couple companies or brands. It's and going more towards like a decentralized, more individual paths. I think the internet, even just a domain, like I can have a domain, a single person, and have a domain that's the same or better than a huge behemoth of a company, because ultimately that domain or that website is just being funneled, it's just code. So it's literally whose code's better. And if one coder can outproduce 1,000 coders, if that one coder is better than 1,000 people. So I'll keep probably bringing up these topics because I am interested, and I think maybe I'll just be sharing and kind of as I'm learning, share it here to try to just give my own take on some just interesting things. I think our economy is changing, and it's just good to be I think just thinking about new ways of doing business and kind of what dogmas that we're listening to and still around in people's heads and their software, what kind of is obsolete. So I think, yeah, so that's it for now. Let's see the next segment. How's this camera look? So yeah, the next topic